The rifle shot came from the far end of Main Street. It cut through the dust and the silence like a blade. Up near the saloon, a rope snapped free from a post. The woman collapsed onto her knees, gasping. The man with the rifle lowered it slowly. Smoke curled from the barrel. But that single shot was hours away. The morning had started with a different sound altogether. The thin, desperate wail of a newborn who had not eaten since dawn. Main Street in Durango was already hot by 10 o'clock. Dust hung in the air and stuck to skin. The baby cried from inside the general store, but Henry Whitfield could not move. He stood on the boardwalk with his son clutched to his chest, a rifle barrel pressed hard against his ribs. Deputy Cal Pierce held the gun. He was smirking. Out in the middle of the street, Wade Briggs had tied an Apache woman to the hitching post. The rope cut into her wrists. She did not scream. She did not beg. Ada stood there with blood running down her fingers, and her dark eyes fixed on nothing. 40 people lined the boardwalk. They saw the rope. They saw the woman's cracked lips. They heard the baby shrieking. Not one of them spoke. Briggs circled Ada like a man inspecting livestock. He was tall and heavy across the shoulders, with a thick mustache and a slow, practiced smile. He held a leather riding crop in one hand. "You know where it is," he said. Ada said nothing. He swung the crop. The slap echoed down the street. Her head jerked sideways. A red welt rose on her cheek. Still, she made no sound. "The deed," Briggs said. "You tell me where Edna hid it, and this ends." At the name of his dead wife, Henry's knees buckled. Pierce shoved him upright. The baby screamed louder. Briggs turned to the crowd. He spread his arms wide. "Anybody here want to help her? Anybody want to tell me where that paper is?" His voice was cheerful. "Nobody. Good. Then we keep going." The sheriff stood on the saloon steps a few yards away. Tom Weston had his badge pinned clean on his vest. He watched. He did nothing. Ada turned her head just enough to see Henry. Her eyes found the baby. Something shifted in her face. A sorrow older than the town itself. She had fed that child once. She had come to the Whitfield door 2 weeks after Edna was buried, when the baby's crying was so constant that neighbors had stopped sleeping. She had knocked. She had said, quiet and simple, "I can feed him." Henry never forgot that knock. He never forgot how she had saved his boy, and now she was tied to a post because of it. Briggs noticed the look between them. He grabbed Ada by the chin. "You think he can help you? He can't even hold his own son without shaking." He laughed. The men with him laughed, too. Pierce dug the rifle deeper into Henry's side. "Should I take the kid? Might quiet him down." "Leave him," Briggs said. "The crying helps, puts pressure on the witch." He turned back to Ada. "Last chance. Where is the deed?" Ada's lips parted. For a moment, the whole street leaned in. Even the baby paused. Then she spoke. "Where you cannot reach it." The smile vanished from Briggs's face. He hit her again. She staggered against the post. The crowd rustled. A woman in the doorway of the dressmaker's shop covered her mouth. A boy tugged at his father's sleeve. Nobody stepped forward. Henry sobbed once, a broken sound that mixed with his son's cries. The sun climbed. The dust thickened. Ada's knees trembled, but she did not fall. She kept her eyes open and her head up. Nobody knew that a stranger had just crossed the Durango line. A man on a dark brown horse with a red bandana tied at his throat. He heard the baby wail from half a mile away. He rode toward it. The day had not yet reached its end, but already a rifle had a bullet waiting with a name on it, and the man who would fire it was getting closer. The stranger kept his horse at a steady trot. The land opened up around him, dry grass, red rock, heat shimmering off the flats. Ahead, Durango sat low against the hills. He could see the white steeple of a church. He could see the dark shapes of buildings clustered along Main Street. And still, riding in on the wind, he could hear the baby. The crying pulled at something old and buried. He had heard that sound before. Men learned to ignore it, or they learned to ride toward it. He had never been the kind to ignore it. But he didn't know the whole story yet. Nobody had told him what had happened a month earlier, on a night when the moon was thin and the Whitfield ranch sat quiet under the stars. Edna Whitfield was still alive then. She had the baby wrapped against her chest in a wool blanket Henry had traded 2 good saddles for. The boy was only 3 weeks old. He did not sleep through the night yet. Edna did not mind. Those quiet hours with the baby were the only time the world felt safe. The lantern in the kitchen window was burning low when she heard the horses. 3 riders came out of the dark. She knew the heavy shape of the one in front before he dismounted. Wade Briggs. He owned half the valley through deals made with a gun in his hand. He had been eyeing the Whitfield land since before the baby was born. He didn't knock. He shoved the door open and stepped inside like he owned the place already. "Where's your husband?" he asked. "In town," Edna said. She kept her voice steady. The baby stirred against her. Briggs nodded to one of his men. The man left the kitchen and went deeper into the house, checking rooms, making sure Henry really wasn't there. "I'm going to make this simple," Briggs said. "Sign your land over to me, tonight. I have a paper in my saddlebag with room for your name." Edna shook her head. "We're not selling." "I'm not buying." The second man had stepped around behind her. She felt him there, blocking the back door. "You can sign it peaceful," Briggs said, "or you can sign it bloody. Makes no difference to me." Edna's hand moved toward the kitchen table. Not for a pen, for the old rifle Henry kept propped in the corner. She was fast, but not fast enough. Briggs drew his pistol. The shot went through the open doorway. It hit Edna in the chest. The baby screamed. She went down on the floorboards with the boy still wrapped against her. On his way out, Briggs kicked the rifle aside. He looked at the weeping infant and the woman dying on the floor. "Find the deed," he told his men, "and burn the house if you have to." Henry came home an hour later. He found his wife cold. He found his son lying on a pile of blankets in the corner, still alive, still crying. He buried Edna under the cottonwood tree behind the barn. He stood there a long time with the baby in his arms. Then he went inside and searched every drawer and every shelf. The deed was gone. Word spread that Edna Whitfield had been killed in a robbery. Nobody believed it. Nobody asked questions either. Wade Briggs was a man who collected debts and loyalties the way other men collected cattle. He had the sheriff in his pocket. He had 5 men who would draw on his say-so. He had the town so scared that even the preacher looked at his boots when Briggs walked past. Henry knew who killed his wife, but he couldn't prove it, and if he tried, Briggs would come for the baby next. So he stayed silent. He fed his son with a bottle of goat's milk that went sour in the heat. The baby lost weight. The crying did not stop. Then Ada came. She had seen Edna once at the trading post, a brief meeting that ended with a kindness. Edna had given Ada a sack of dried beans when no white woman in Durango would speak to her. Ada remembered. She walked 6 miles to the Whitfield door, heard the baby screaming inside, and knocked. "I can feed him," she said. And so she did. For 3 weeks, she came every morning and every evening. She saved the child's life. And Edna, in the days before she died, had trusted Ada with one other thing. On the last visit, Edna had pressed a folded paper into Ada's hands, the deed to the Whitfield land. "Hide it," Edna had whispered. "Somewhere he won't look, somewhere safe." Ada had nodded. She had not asked questions. She had carried the paper to the church that same night and lifted a loose plank beneath the last pew. The priest saw her but said nothing. The deed went into the dark. Ada never spoke of it again. But secrets had a way of bleeding through the cracks. Briggs had spent the last month trying to file his claim. Without the deed, the land office in Santa Fe wouldn't touch his paperwork. He needed that document. He searched the Whitfield house top to bottom. He broke furniture. He tore up floorboards. Nothing. Then one of his men mentioned the Apache woman. She'd been at the ranch. She'd been alone with Edna more than once. Maybe Edna had slipped her something. Maybe she knew. This morning, Briggs sent Pierce and 2 others to drag Ada out of her shack by the creek. They pulled her into town by her hair. They tied her to the hitching post in full view of every man, woman, and child, whoever pretended they didn't see anything. Now the sun was high. Ada's blood was drying on the rope. Henry Whitfield stood trembling with his son in his arms. The crowd watched and did nothing. Briggs was smiling. But the stranger had reached the edge of Durango. He pulled his horse to a stop just outside the last building. He sat still under the brim of his hat and looked down Main Street. He saw the woman lashed to the post. He saw the man with the baby. He saw the deputy grinning with a rifle in his hands. The red bandana at his throat moved gently with his breathing. His face showed nothing. He checked his rifle one time. Then he touched his heels to the horse and rode forward into the waiting silence. He rode in slow. The dust kicked up around the horse's hooves and settled on his boots. No one looked his way at first. They were all fixed on the post and the bleeding woman tied to it. The baby's cry had turned ragged. It was thinner now. Henry Whitfield's arms were shaking. Deputy Pierce kept his rifle jammed just below Henry's ribs. He was still smirking. The stranger passed the general store. Through the open door, he saw a knocked-over crate and a smear of blood on the floorboards. Probably where they grabbed Ada. He took it in without slowing. Up ahead, Briggs was pacing. He slapped the riding crop against his own boot. He was talking, but the stranger couldn't hear the words yet. He didn't need to. The scene told him enough. He pulled the horse to a stop near the dressmaker's shop. A woman stood in the doorway with her hand still pressed to her mouth. She was middle-aged, gray-streaked hair pulled tight. Her eyes kept darting from Ada to the men with guns and back again. The stranger stepped down from the saddle. He moved without hurry. He looped the reins loosely over a hitching rail. Then he turned to the woman. "How long has she been up there?" he asked. His voice was quiet. No drawl, no edge. The woman blinked. She looked around to see if anyone was listening. The men on the saloon steps were all watching Briggs. "Since sunup," she whispered. "They dragged her out of her place by the creek. Been hitting her all morning." The man with the baby. Henry Whitfield. Her voice cracked. His wife was murdered a month back. Wade Briggs shot her dead in her own kitchen. Now he wants the deed to their land. Says the Apache woman knows where it is. The stranger looked at Ada. Her head was bowed now. She was still on her feet. But just barely. "Does she?" he asked. The woman shook her head. "I don't know. But she was the one who kept the baby alive. Edna, the wife, trusted her. That woman came every day, twice a day, to feed that boy. And now look." The stranger's eyes found the baby. The child's face was red and wet. His tiny fists were clenched. Henry was whispering to him. The words were broken. "The sheriff?" the stranger said. The woman's mouth tightened. "Bought and paid for. Been standing on those steps the whole time. He won't do a thing." The stranger nodded once. He stepped away from the doorway. He didn't get back on his horse. He walked it forward 10 feet, tied it to a post near the feed store. Then he stood in the shade of the awning with his rifle cradled in his arm. He did not leave. A ripple went through the crowd. Heads turned. Briggs didn't notice. But Ada did. She lifted her chin. Her dark eyes found the stranger across the dust and the heat. Something passed between them. Not hope, Not quite. Something closer to recognition. The look of one who sees a door open that was bolted shut. The baby's cry faded to a thin, wet gasp, and the stranger stood still, waiting. The stranger stepped out from under the awning. His boots hit the dust with a sound that carried in the quiet. The crowd parted for him without a word. Faces turned. The woman in the dressmaker's doorway dropped her hand from her mouth. Wade Briggs had his back to the street. He was still talking at Ada, the crop swinging loose from his fingers. His men saw the stranger first. One of them, a lean man with a scar across his chin, tapped Briggs on the shoulder. Briggs turned. His eyes found the stranger, and his smile flickered, then steadied. "Well," Briggs said, "somebody knew." The stranger kept walking. He stopped 10 feet from the post. He did not look at Ada now. He looked only at Briggs. "You're in my town," Briggs said. "You see we're busy." "I see a woman tied to a post," the stranger said. "I see a man with a baby who can't move. I see a sheriff on the saloon steps doing nothing. That's what I see." Briggs glanced over at the saloon. Sheriff Tom Weston had not moved. His hands were hooked in his belt. "You got a name?" Briggs asked. "No." "Then you got no business here. Mount up and ride out. Nobody's stopping you." The stranger didn't move. The brim of his hat threw a shadow across his eyes. His thumb rested on the lever of his rifle. Ada watched from the post. Her wrists were bleeding freely now. The rope had soared through the outer skin. She did not look at her own hands. She looked at the stranger's face. Briggs took a step closer. His men spread out behind him. 3 of them fanned to the left. 2 more shifted to the right. Deputy Pierce kept his rifle on Henry, but his eyes kept flicking toward the stranger. "You deaf?" Briggs said. "I said ride out." "Cut her loose," the stranger said. "Then I'll go." Briggs laughed. It was a short, hard sound. He turned to his men. "He wants me to cut her loose." They laughed with him. The scar-chinned man spat in the dust. "Maybe he's sweet on her." "Maybe," Briggs said. He faced the stranger again. "I'll say it one more time. You leave now. You keep breathing. You stay. You end up like her husband's wife. You understand me?" The stranger's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Henry Whitfield made a sound like a man drowning. The baby had gone quiet now, not from comfort, but from exhaustion. The silence was worse than the crying. Briggs saw the stranger wasn't leaving. His smile finally died. He looked past the stranger to the sheriff. "Weston, you see this?" Sheriff Weston cleared his throat. He pushed off the saloon post and walked down the steps, slow and heavy. He stopped at the edge of the crowd. "Stranger," the sheriff said, "best you do what the man says. This is a town matter, not your concern." "It's my concern now," the stranger said. The sheriff's face went red. "I'm the law here." "You're wearing a badge," the stranger said. "That's not the same thing." A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone gasped. Briggs's hand tightened on the riding crop. "You got a lot of mouth for a man alone," Briggs said. He dropped the crop. His right hand drifted toward the pistol on his hip. "Last chance." The stranger did not answer. He stood perfectly still. The red bandana at his throat was the brightest thing on the street. Briggs's eyes narrowed. "Boys," he said, "show him what happens to men who don't listen." The 5 men drew. 6 hammers clicked back in the heavy noon silence. Every gun was pointed at the stranger's chest. Deputy Pierce swung his rifle away from Henry and leveled it too. Henry stumbled back, clutching his son. Ada's breath caught. The crowd shrank away from the street. The stranger did not raise his rifle. He did not move his hand toward his pistol. He just stood there with the hammers cocked and the barrels aimed and the sun beating down on his dusty hat. Briggs smiled again. "You wanted this." and the silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. The stranger did not raise his rifle. He did not reach for the pistol on his hip. He just stood there with 6 barrels trained on his chest and let the silence do its work. Briggs waited. His men waited. The whole town waited. Nothing happened. "Go on," Briggs said. "Do something stupid." The stranger didn't move. He looked past the guns. He looked at Ada. The rope had cut deep enough that the blood was dripping onto the dust now. She was still watching him. He looked at Henry Whitfield. The man was holding his baby so tight the child squirmed. The baby had stopped crying. He was too tired. Then the stranger looked at the sheriff. Tom Weston had his hand on his own pistol now. Sweat tracked down the side of his face. He had no stomach for what was coming. That was plain. The stranger turned his head just slightly. He looked at the crowd. The woman in the dressmaker's doorway, the old man leaning on a cane, the boy who had tugged his father's sleeve. Their faces were white with fear. "You're all witnesses," the stranger said. His voice was calm. No anger, no plea. Just a statement. "Every one of you. You'll remember this." Briggs snorted. "They'll remember you getting buried." The stranger's eyes moved back to Briggs. 6 against 1. And I'm not even holding a weapon in my hands. That's what you want them to remember? A flicker of something crossed Briggs's face. Not fear, irritation. The man was used to people cowering. He was not used to being judged out loud. "Pierce," Briggs said, "take his rifle." Deputy Pierce hesitated. He glanced at the sheriff. Weston gave him a small nod. Pierce shifted his rifle to one hand and stepped toward the stranger. The stranger did not resist. He let Pierce pull the lever-action rifle from his grip. The deputy tossed it into the dust 10 feet away. "Pistol, too," Briggs said. Pierce reached for the stranger's holster. The stranger didn't help him. He didn't stop him either. Pierce pulled the pistol free and dropped it next to the rifle. "Now what?" Briggs said. "You're just a man in a hat." The stranger said nothing. Ada's lips moved. A single word. No one heard it, but she said it anyway. Something in her own language. Something like a prayer. Briggs stepped closer to the stranger. He was close enough to smell the dust on his clothes. "I'll give you one more chance. Get on your horse. Ride out. Don't look back. Do that and you live." The stranger didn't look at Briggs. He looked past him. He looked at the lean man with the scar on his chin. The man was shifting his weight from foot to foot. He looked at the man next to him, a nervous kid with a patchy beard and eyes that kept darting toward the crowd. They weren't all killers. Some of them were just scared men with guns. "I'll ride," the stranger said. "But first I got one question." Briggs laughed. "You want to ask me a question? With 6 guns on you?" "Just one." The scarred man muttered something under his breath. Briggs held up a hand. "Fine. Ask." The stranger pointed with his chin toward Ada. "You've been beating that woman all morning. She hasn't told you anything. What makes you think she'll talk if you beat her all afternoon?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Briggs blinked. He didn't have an answer ready. "You're asking the wrong person," the stranger said. "She doesn't know where your paper is. She never did." The words hung in the hot air. Ada's eyes widened just a fraction. Not fear, surprise. She hadn't expected him to know. Briggs's face went dark. "You don't know nothing." "I know you've already torn the Whitfield house apart," the stranger said. "I saw the broken door when I rode past. I saw the furniture in the yard. You've been looking for a month. You haven't found it, because it's not there." Briggs took a step forward. The men behind him tightened their grips on their guns. "Then where is it?" "If I knew that," the stranger said, "I wouldn't be standing here talking to you." A ripple of confusion moved through the gang. The scarred man looked at Briggs. The nervous kid looked at the scarred man. Pierce had stepped back and was now standing between the stranger and Henry. Nobody seemed sure what to do. The stranger used the moment. He took a slow step backward, then another. His hands stayed at his sides. "Where are you going?" Briggs demanded. "To my horse, like you said." Another step. The men didn't fire. They looked to Briggs. Briggs didn't give the order. His face was working through something. The stranger had planted the idea that Ada didn't have the information. If she didn't have it, killing her wouldn't help. And if the stranger might know more than he was saying, killing him was a waste of a lead. The stranger walked backward through the dust. The crowd parted again. He reached his horse. He bent down and picked up his rifle, then his pistol. He slid the rifle into the saddle scabbard. The pistol went back into the holster. He was still outnumbered, still in danger. But the guns had lowered just a few inches. That was enough. He put one boot in the stirrup. Before he swung up, he turned and looked at Ada. One look. A nod so small only she could see it. "Hold on," it said. "I'm not leaving you." Something sparked in her eyes. She straightened against the post. Her chin lifted. She had been given nothing but pain all day. Now she had been given a promise. The stranger swung into the saddle. He turned the horse slowly, giving himself time to listen. "Boss," the scarred man said, "what if he's right? What if she don't have it?" "Shut up," Briggs said. "I'm just saying. We been at this all day. Maybe we got the wrong end of the stick. Maybe it's still at the ranch. There's that root cellar under the barn. We never checked that." The stranger's ears caught it. The root cellar under the barn. He filed it away like a cartridge into a chamber. He didn't react. He just nudged the horse forward and rode out of Durango at a walk. Behind him, Briggs made a decision. His voice carried across the street, loud and ugly. "Untie her. We're taking her to the gallows. If she won't talk now, she can talk with a rope around her neck." Ada heard the words. She did not flinch. She kept her eyes on the road where the stranger had disappeared, and she held onto that nod like a stone in her palm. The sun climbed higher. The town held its breath. And on the edge of Durango, a man on a dark brown horse adjusted his red bandana and turned toward the Whitfield ranch. He had a root cellar to find, and he had very little time. The stranger rode away from Durango, but the dust had barely settled when Wade Briggs gave his next order. "Bring the rope," he said. "The big one from the livery." Ada said nothing. They cut the ties at her wrists and pulled her to her feet. Her legs buckled, but they dragged her anyway. Down Main Street they went, past the dressmaker who had covered her mouth, past the boy who tugged his father's sleeve, past the saloon where Sheriff Tom Weston stood with his hands now hanging useless at his sides. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. The gallows stood at the far end of town, old wood bleached gray by sun and wind. The platform had not been used in 6 years. The trapdoor still worked. Briggs tested it himself, stomping his boot on the planks until they creaked. They put the noose around Ada's neck. The rope was stiff and rough. She felt it scratch her throat. They did not pull it tight yet. They wanted her to stand there and feel the weight of it while the sun beat down and the town gathered in a half-circle of shame. "You see this?" Briggs called out. "This is what happens when a stranger sticks his nose where it don't belong. Nobody helped her then. Nobody helped her now. And because of that man, she hangs." Ada's eyes were dry. She looked at the crowd. She found the dressmaker. She found the old man with the cane. She found the boy. She held each gaze for a moment, and every single person looked away. Henry Whitfield was not among them. He had slipped out during the commotion, clutching his son to his chest, running low and fast behind the feed store and into the scrub. He did not stop until he reached the root cellar under his own barn. He was there now, in the dark, rocking the baby and praying to a God he wasn't sure was listening. The stranger reached the Whitfield ranch, just as the sun began its slow drop toward the hills. The house was a ruin. Broken chairs lay in the yard. A shattered lantern hung from one hinge of the front door. The smell of old smoke and turned earth hung heavy in the air. He stepped off his horse and stood still. He was listening. At first, nothing. Then, from somewhere under the barn, came a sound no man could mistake for anything else, the thin, exhausted cry of a newborn. He found the root cellar door behind a pile of rotted hay. He pulled it open. The darkness inside smelled of damp stone and sour milk. Henry Whitfield looked up at him with wide, terrified eyes. The baby was bundled against his chest, barely awake. "Don't shoot," Henry whispered. "Please." "I'm not here to hurt you," the stranger said. "You're the man from town, the one who stood up to Briggs." "I am." Henry's voice cracked. "They took her to the gallows, Ada. They're going to hang her because of what you did." The stranger crouched by the cellar door. "When?" "A few hours ago. I don't know if she's still alive." The stranger looked at the baby. The boy's face was pale, his lips dry. He had not eaten since morning. Ada's milk. The thought struck hard. "Where is the deed?" the stranger asked. Henry blinked. "What?" "The deed to your land. The paper Briggs has been looking for. Ada doesn't have it, but she knows where it is. She told someone. Did she tell you?" Henry swallowed. He looked down at his son. Then he looked up at the stranger, and something shifted in his face. The weight of a secret he had carried alone. "The church," he said. "Under the floor. The last pew on the left. Edna gave it to Ada, and Ada hid it the same night. She only told me last week. She said if anything ever happened I should go there, but I couldn't. They were watching me every minute." The stranger straightened up. "The church. Not the ranch. Not the root cellar. The place nobody would think to look, because Edna Whitfield was not a woman who went to church. That was the trick." "The priest knows?" the stranger asked. "I don't know. Maybe." The stranger nodded. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and handed it down to Henry. "Stay here. Don't move. I'll be back." He had just turned toward his horse when the sound of hooves reached him. Not one horse. 4, maybe 5, riding fast from the direction of town. Briggs's men, sent to burn the house, to destroy whatever was left. The stranger's time had just run out. He glanced toward the road. Dust was rising. He heard the jangle of bridles and the coarse laughter of men who enjoyed their work. They were 2 minutes away, maybe less. He climbed down into the root cellar and pulled the door shut over them. The darkness swallowed them whole. The baby whimpered. Henry trembled. And from somewhere above, the first crackle of a torch took the silence and set it on fire. The fire took the barn first. The old wood was dry as tinder. From inside the root cellar, the stranger heard the crackle and snap of burning beams, the whoosh of flames finding hay, the shouts of men who believed they were erasing something. Henry pressed his back against the cold stone wall. He had his son bundled tight against him. The baby was too exhausted to cry now. He just stared with wide, wet eyes at the dark. The stranger put his ear to the cellar door. He counted voices. 3, maybe 4. They were laughing. He heard the scarred man, the nervous kid with the patchy beard, and one other, a deep, slow voice that belonged to the big man who had held a torch to the front porch. "Make sure it all burns," the scarred man shouted. "Briggs wants nothing left standing." The big man's voice came from farther away, near what used to be the house. "What about the cellar?" "Nothing down there but dirt and rats. We checked." The stranger did not move. The lie held. The stamping of boots moved away, toward the corral. The horses in the barn had been cut loose. They were running wild in the scrub now. The men didn't care. For 15 minutes the flames ate everything above them. The air in the cellar grew thick and bitter. Ash sifted down through the cracks in the door. But the fire did not reach the old stone foundation. The cellar was built like a grave, and it kept them alive. The hoofbeats came at last. The men rode out, laughing and singing. The stranger waited until the sound was gone. Then he pushed the door open. The world above was black and smoking. The barn was a skeleton of charred timber. The house was a pile of glowing embers. Only the stone chimney stood. Heat shimmered in the air. The stranger pulled Henry out of the hole. The man was shaking. The baby squirmed and let out a thin bleat. "The church," the stranger said. "How far?" Henry pointed east. "Half a mile. The white steeple. You can see it from the road." The stranger unhitched his horse from the old cottonwood where he'd tied it. The animal was nervous but steady. He swung into the saddle and looked down at Henry. "I said I'd be back. Take your son. Go to the creek bed and wait. If I don't come before dark, you ride east, and don't look back." Henry didn't answer. He just nodded. Then he did something he hadn't done in a month. He straightened his spine. It wasn't much, but it was something. The stranger turned his horse and rode. The church stood alone on a low rise outside of town. It was a small building, whitewashed once, now peeling and gray. The steeple bell hung silent. The door was unlocked. Nobody had come here in weeks. He stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled of old wood and candle wax. Sunlight fell through the high windows in long, dusty bars. The pews were empty. The altar cloth was stained with time. The last pew on the left. He knelt. The floorboards were old oak, tight-fitted. But one plank near the wall was slightly darker than the rest. He pressed his fingers against the edge. It gave. The board came up without a sound. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a strip of leather, lay the deed. He pulled it out and unfolded it. The ink was still dark. The signatures were clear. Edna Whitfield's name was there, and Henry's, and the surveyor's seal from the land office in Santa Fe. It was all the proof any honest judge would need. He folded it carefully and placed it inside his vest, next to his chest. Then he stood and walked back into the light. The gallows in Durango stood at the end of Main Street like a permanent stain. The crowd was still gathered in a half circle, though some had slipped away when they saw the smoke rising from the Whitfield ranch. They knew what that smoke meant. They did not speak of it. Ada stood on the platform. The noose was loose around her neck. Her face was ashen, her wrists crusted with dried blood. But her eyes were still open, and still watching. Wade Briggs stood next to her, a hand on the lever. He was smiling again. He had sent his men to burn a house and kill a memory. Now he would hang a woman and call it justice. He felt powerful. He felt untouchable. He looked out at the crowd. "Last chance," he called. "Anybody want to speak for her?" No one moved. The dressmaker had her hand over her mouth again. The old man leaned heavier on his cane. The boy who had tugged his father's sleeve was gone. His father had taken him home and locked the door. Sheriff Tom Weston stood at the base of the gallows, his hand resting on his belt. His face was pale. He had been told to stand there and look official. He did as he was told. He always did. Briggs raised his hand toward the lever. "Then by my authority—" The sound of a single horse interrupted him. A dark brown horse with a rider in a light beige hat and a red bandana. The stranger rode straight down Main Street, past the general store, past the dressmaker's shop, past the saloon where men had once done nothing. He stopped his horse 20 feet from the gallows. He stepped down. He did not raise his rifle. He held something in his hand. "The deed," he said. His voice was quiet and calm. It carried all the same. The crowd turned. Ada's eyes found him, and for the first time all day the faintest shadow of a smile touched her cracked lips. Briggs froze. His hand hovered over the lever. "You brought me the paper. Good. Hand it over and I'll let her go." "No," the stranger said. "You won't." He held the document up for all to see. The seal caught the sun. "This paper belongs to Henry Whitfield. It was hidden under the floor of the church. Ada never had it. She never said where it was. She was protecting the one place you never thought to look." He turned to the crowd. Not to the men with guns, to the people, the dressmaker, the old man, the farmer who had looked at his boots all morning. "You all know what happened. Edna Whitfield was murdered for this. Ada was beaten for this, and every one of you let it happen." No one spoke, but a few looked at the ground. A few looked at each other. Briggs's smile was gone. His face was the color of old meat. "You got one chance, stranger. Hand that paper over now, or I'll hang her and put a bullet in you." "No," the stranger said. "You won't. Because if you do, every person here will see a man who murdered 2 women and a stranger for a piece of land he couldn't even steal right. And maybe, just maybe, they'll finally do something about it." He stepped closer. His hands were empty now. The deed was back inside his vest. He stopped at the foot of the gallows stairs and looked up at Wade Briggs. "Last chance," the stranger said. "Step away from the lever. Tell your men to put their guns down. Face what you've done. Or don't. Either way, it ends here." Briggs looked at his men. The scarred man was already reaching for his pistol. The nervous kid was frozen. The big man who had held the torch was nowhere to be seen. He had seen the stranger's face and slipped away. Briggs looked at the sheriff. Weston's hand was shaking on his belt. He gave no signal. Briggs looked at the crowd. For the first time, he saw something other than fear in their faces. He saw waiting, and waiting was dangerous. He grabbed the lever. Then she dies. Ada closed her eyes, and the stranger drew. The stranger's hand moved faster than a blink. Before Wade Briggs could pull the lever, a single shot cracked through the square. The bullet caught Briggs high in the chest. The impact threw him backward off the platform. He hit the dust and didn't move again. The noose stayed loose around Ada's neck. She opened her eyes. The lever hadn't been pulled. She was still standing. The stranger was still standing. Smoke curled from the barrel of his pistol. For a long moment nobody breathed. The scarred man reached for his weapon. The stranger turned his head just slightly. The scarred man froze, then dropped his pistol in the dirt. The nervous kid did the same. Deputy Cal Pierce, who had been standing at the side of the platform, let his rifle fall from his hands. He looked sick. Sheriff Tom Weston stood at the base of the gallows with his mouth open. His hand was still on his belt. The stranger walked past him without a word. He climbed the wooden steps. He pulled a knife from his boot and cut the rope from Ada's neck. Then he cut the bindings at her wrists. The rope fell away in stiff, bloody pieces. Ada looked at him. Her eyes were clear. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The stranger turned to face the crowd. The dressmaker stepped out of her doorway. The old man leaned forward on his cane. Others who had hidden behind curtains and closed doors began to gather. The stranger held up the deed again, the seal catching the last light of the sun. "This land belongs to Henry Whitfield," he said, "and every one of you knows it." He looked at the sheriff. "You stood there all day, while an innocent woman was beaten. You let a murderer run this town. You don't get to wear that badge anymore." Sheriff Weston's face went gray. He unhooked the star from his vest. He set it on the edge of the gallows platform. Then he walked away down Main Street. No one stopped him. No one followed. The stranger stepped down from the platform. He walked to his horse and slid the pistol back into its holster. He mounted up slowly. The crowd parted. He looked back once, at Ada, who was now standing on her own 2 feet, her head high. At the dressmaker, who had finally stepped all the way out of her shop, at the old man who nodded once. Then he heard a sound from the edge of town. Hoofbeats, not coming in, coming out. Henry Whitfield appeared from the creek bed, his baby cradled in one arm, his horse moving at a nervous trot. He saw Ada. He saw the stranger. He saw the body of Wade Briggs in the dust, and he understood. He rode straight to Ada. She held out her arms for the baby. He gave her the child. She sat down on the gallows steps, right there in front of everyone, and put the baby to her breast. The boy latched. He fed. For the first time all day, he stopped crying. The stranger touched his heels to his horse. He rode out of Durango with the red bandana bright against his shirt. No one called after him. No one asked his name. The town had seen enough. They would remember him, but they would never know who he was. As he passed the last building, the old man with the cane raised one hand. It was not a wave. It was a salute. The stranger didn't turn to see it. He just kept riding west into the open land, until the dust swallowed the shape of his hat and the sound of the hooves faded into silence. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.